The next part of the morning is going to be, we're going to get to hear from Professor Rowena Arshad of the University of Edinburgh. It's a great pleasure of mine to introduce her to you. Rowena is going to address us on the themes of teacher agency and teachers as agents of change. And I think that's very pertinent given some of the discussions that we heard in the first part of this morning. Rowena is the first BME person to hold the role of Dean of Education in Scotland, is an exemplary agent of change herself and has been for many years of her career within education. In the early days, she was a strident EIS activist within our anti-racist subcommittee, working with union colleagues to promote race equality within the profession and for the young people in our schools and colleges. Rowena now chairs a national working group focused on improving diversity within the teaching profession. Earlier this year, she was awarded a fellowship with the EIS, and at this year's AGM spoke stirringly about the value of education, the value of teachers, and their crucial role in bringing about positive change and progress within our society. Prepare to be inspired. Here, Rowena.
Thank you. Andrea Bradley does set you up, doesn't she? So I'm going to go to the podium just to be different, and teacher agency for the taking, question mark. It's a joy to actually be here, to actually have heard this morning, to have heard Carol, and to have actually heard your Q&A, because I think that it's absolutely no doubt everybody in this room wants to make a difference. The fact that you've given up your Saturday to be here, to talk about empowerment, leadership, etc., you've made a choice. Now, whether that's for your personal growth, professional growth, or whether that's because you're part of a trade union and you want to collectively work to improve working conditions for yourselves, but also for your colleagues, but more importantly, I think to also ensure you protect the education system that you are part of, and we are part of, so that it continues to be that critical, challenging education, and not simply one that reproduces. And I think that's important. So for me, you've demonstrated your intent to use your agency, to be agentic, and to take control of what you might be able to influence. So, to quote Dumbledore, it is choices, it is our choices that actually show what we truly are, rather than our abilities. And I say that because it's really important. Women in particular, I think, always underplay our ability. And we always say, well, maybe we can't do it, maybe we can't apply for that job. Actually make the choices, that choice is yours. Equally, I think many teachers feel they lack agency in their opinions and voices are not factored into decision making and into your local authorities or national policies or in influencing curriculum framework. And I guess there's an element of that that is absolutely true, from what I've heard already in the morning, in the previous session. So you need to hold on to Alice Walker. You absolutely need to hold on to this, which is the most common way you give up power is actually by thinking you don't have any. So if at any time you start feeling down, and you start feeling disabled, and you start feeling disempowered, can you remember Alice Walker? Because if you give somebody that space, they'll take it. So hold on to that power that you have. But agency is not something I think you can just acquire. You need to set up the conditions. We need to set up the conditions that will improve the ability we have to take to use our agentic capacities. So in this next few minutes, I thought 4 areas that I would want to quickly cover. One is the ethical and professional stance, which has already been talked about this morning. The second is understanding who we are, our strengths and our gaps, critical agency, and collective agency. So these are themes that have been running all morning. In terms of the ethical and professional stance, so taking something recently that I saw on Twitter, a primary teacher in Edinburgh, he tweeted this. This was him doing his test with his students or assessment. Had a pupil was dealing with a heap of issues. Sat down to do tests, multiple choice, ticking random boxes halfway through tests within a minute. Stopped assessment, chatted with pupil, not the day to do an exam, and accordingly reset the next day. He then tweeted that and then asked the question whether he had been bending the rules and accountability pressures that he came under. Now, I think, and you would agree, I mean, some of you may actually have done this kind of thing, and in fact probably have, see from a few nods. So for me, what this teacher was doing was actually exercising his agency, his professional opinion of a situation, taking control and saying, in order to facilitate learning, I'm going to put the child above the assessment. Now, he was worried that he would get comeback on it, but he did it anyway. This was an NQT into just after their first year. So I wonder whether that's because he hasn't quite been disciplined by the system often enough yet. He's still, you know, sort of bouncing and wanting to get on with it. But, you know, I see that kind of thing a lot, where the passions and the joy are just taken out by the system. So we had another one that I saw very recently. This was just this August. One of the NQTs going, oh, I'm so excited, I've got a primary one class, and I'm going to ask the parents to tell me one thing they want me to know about their child. Okay, so the first tweet that came back in was, you need to check with the head teacher whether this is the protocol of the school. And I thought, oh, for God's sake, no, absolutely no. So then, just as well, lots of tweets came in from teachers who are parents going, hey, I wish somebody had asked me that question. You go ahead. Now, whether she went ahead or not, I don't know. But this is an example of how the system squashes that joy of teaching out of that individual. So teacher agency, I think, is linked with teacher professionalism. And holding on to our professionalism and professional ethics, particularly important now in a system that is increasingly becoming process-driven, under regimes of testing, already mentioned, but also different forms of accountability, including financial accountability, where education is primarily seen in terms of qualification function and the acquisition of skills. I'm not saying we shouldn't have qualifications and skills, but education has to first and foremost be to be about gaining knowledge. What is the knowledge that the next generation need to learn, that we need to teach or co-teach with them for the purpose of their future? Whose knowledge? Agentic teachers are teachers who are producers of knowledge, not just consumers of knowledge. So I think that's really important. I teach in initial teacher education. I do a lot of initial teacher education courses. And a few weeks ago, I did a couple of sessions, once to the PGDE primary and secondary lot, and then another one to the undergraduate. Now, I'm not going to say, well, I'll tell you which lot, but one lot I asked them, and there was about 120 people in the room, and I said, how many of you have heard the phrase decolonizing the curriculum? As I don't want an explanation, you don't need to know anything about it. I just need to know whether you've heard that phrase. Put up your hand. Not a single hand went up. So I gave them permission. I said, listen, I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to put you on the spot. I just need to know whether you've heard this phrase. And not a single hand went up. I have to say to you that I was bitterly disappointed, because I think to myself, crikey, either they're too shy, which is my kind of hopeful explanation, or actually they are just going to be consumers rather than producers. Now, I did the same exercise with the PG lot, and I have to say that quite a few hands did go up. And I do wonder whether, because perhaps it has come from another discipline, from geography or from sociology or from psychology, where these things have been discussed and they've been given permission to discuss them. You're all part of a union that has shown that teachers are not just passive consumers of the system, and that schools are not just mere reproductive institutions. Teachers have created systems of resistance all their life, showed disobedience to authority. And yes, sometimes it has been manipulative in the way it's been done, but it's been there and covert. They've gone on strike to improve working conditions. So teacher agency has always been around. It's not a new phenomenon. It's talked about as though it is. Teachers have always utilized their agencies to transform their realities for the better. So for me, having teacher agency, the first thing in terms of the professionalism part of it is to avoid instrumentalism, to engage with the wider purpose of education. I think that's really important. This is not negotiable. Having strong educational values, and you immediately will come back to me and say, well, that's a big concept, what are educational values, and we can be here all day talking about it and debating it, but essentially I think it is about knowledge, having knowledge, thinking about where the silences are in terms of knowledge, so that you're not just consumers but producers. Many of us have been consumers of a knowledge system that has largely ignored the contributions of women, that have largely ignored the contributions of other minoritized groups, and minority groups have been less powerful. And that's fine. Nobody's saying that, you know, we know that. But to continue to do that, that's complicit. So we can't continue to do that. So knowledge is a value that we must hold on to. So it's not just about certification. How we actually help young people to discover new knowledge and to classify them, that's a method, so we hold on to that. Having skills to operationalize the knowledge, so skills is there. Individuals, and I guess the 4 capacities do cover that, but self-esteem of individuals, we want to hold on to that. So anything that erodes self-esteem, we need to start questioning and putting a pause button on. Socialization is key. We have to coexist in this world that's increasingly diverse and complex. We have to learn to interact. And that's not just with the human world, but also with the environmental world. So learning how to be a full member of our planet Earth is really important. And morality. Morals was mentioned earlier today. The reason is, how do you help our young people to reason through complicated moral situations, to deliberate with each other, to debate, and to have self-discipline and integrity? So for me, that's really important, holding on to your professional expertise, your professionalism, your professional identity. That's part of the setting up the conditions for an agentic teacher. The second is understanding who we are. And in my field, I use the term positionality. Who are we? What lights your fire? What is it that makes you switch on, and what makes it switch off? How does your life experience impact on your professional thinking and practice? So in my own doctoral studies, I wanted to find out why some teachers appeared to be able to put social justice front and center, regardless of workload, regardless of policy changes, regardless of the stresses that they have in their life. They still thought in that way. And I thought, well, I'd like to find out why they have that passion. And when I interviewed them, I found that there was a whole range of reasons why they were connected to issues of social justice. Some because they had grown up in a single-parent home, in a village where largely divorcees or women bringing up children on their own were frowned upon. So they knew that they were different and they actually understood about justice. Others because they had been gay and realized that they couldn't come out and they had to be the other as they were growing up. So they started to understand about issues. Other people had traveled the world and had seen discrimination in different forms. Others, because of their faith, they had that and they knew that peace, justice issues were really important. So people came at it from a whole range of reasons. But what that taught me was that who we are is so important, and our life journey dictates and also shapes our current impact on how we see our life, our professional biographies, but also our personal biographies. And this position that we have in the world, in society, is reflected in so many different ways and plays out every day in terms of how we feel in our school, in our classroom, within our peer groups, who we choose as our friends, who we don't, in fact, as well. And I also think that it also motivates what we become passionate for in terms of our content, our pedagogy, and so on. But there are some people in this room who will have more barriers and more hurdles to jump than others. And the more of these you have, the more the emotional tax you will feel and will challenge your ability to be agentic. So you need to recognize all of that, not because you're going to go into some kind of victim mode, but actually you need to be able to recognize who you are in order to position how you then take on that agency. It is therefore important as teachers, as educators, that we think about who we are and the gaps in our life. So for example, I have very little knowledge of transgender issues. This is an area I am having to learn about. And getting to know my own positionality on different things can be an uncomfortable process. Earlier we talked about how hierarchical the system is. And actually it starts even from the university in our initial teacher education. So when I was head of school a few years back, a group of secondary, no, it wasn't secondary, group primary second years decided that they were going to put in a complaint about that program. And I don't know about any of you, any heads of service, when a student complaint comes in, we deal with it very, very quickly because it's really important to hear that. So I just said to the colleagues, let's just get the whole group in, the whole year 2, there's about 80, 90 of them. We'll get the biggest room we can find, and anybody who wants to come can just come. It'll be an hour long, between 12 and 1 o'clock, and let's just get them to come. So, because I was head of school, nobody challenged me on it, went, okay. And but then about 2 hours or so beforehand, one of them emailed me and said, what's the agenda then? And I went, there isn't any, we're here to listen. Yeah, but what about the agenda then? There isn't any, you just come. And they went, okay. So they came, the staff, and when I walked into the room, the staff all sat on one side, and the chairs were all like that, where you were. And I'm like, oh, good grief. So I changed it around, we more semicircle, and I said to the staff, move around. This is not a them and us, move around. And what it was that, I mean, some of the points that were raised were actually not very valid. Many were, but some of them were highly practical. So this was for our MA Primary Education program that has this year-long placement, right? And what the students were saying is, because SAS was paying the SAS payments over 12 months, this was impacting for some of them on housing benefit. So they actually were losing certain forms of benefits over summer because of the way SAS was paying over 12 months. Simple, pay over 10 months. So we were able to negotiate that with SAS. And what that taught me, and that astounded me from my colleagues, was actually they were products of the system, the Scottish education system largely, that is so hierarchical. So they have behaved in that way as well. Now we've got to change at every level. So for me, and I did say to them at the end, was it okay, you know, did you, and they said actually there were some really important points that were raised, absolutely. But had we said this confrontational thing going on, they may have still said what they needed to say, but I'm sure it would have been said in a much more confrontational way, rather than a conversation of how can we solve this fairly genuine life problem that some of them had. So for me, this importance of getting knowledge through professional update, learning, inquiry is so important. Now, professional learning is not the answer to everything, but I can tell you this, the more knowledge we have, the more confidence we will have. When I was a rookie lecturer going into class many, many years ago, I would go in armed with books and reports, backup, activity material, all sorts of things, including, for those of you who are old enough in this room, acetates. Yes, some people did use acetates. I'm not quite the sort of thing. But anyway, now when I go into a room, I pretty much go in by myself because I have gained that knowledge, experience, and confidence. So different stages you are in your journey will impact on how agentic you feel as well. I was giving evidence in Parliament last week, in fact just this week, I can't remember now. What is this day? Today is Saturday, so it's Thursday. And there were 4 of us in the panel, and I won't mention. So I came in with just me and my daughter, and that was it. And I saw one of my panel members, and he'd walked in with a whole pile of reports, and he said, oh, I've read this, I've done this. And I'm starting to panic, because I thought, oh my goodness, he's done all this homework. And then I can't answer with all the stats and all the figures, and how am I going to memorize all these things? And I thought, oh, just stop. You know what you're talking about. You don't need all this baggage to come with you. I thought, oh, you're clearly not very confident. So that was my point. Now, to the third point, critical agency. Being agents of change, I think, being agentic teachers is totally meaningless if you don't couch it within a values framework. After all, you can be agents of change for somebody else's agenda, right? So this is important. Now, Mark Priestley, many of you know Mark, who's from Stirling University, has written extensively about teacher agency, and he would say we often have an uncritical approach to agency. So again, Mark's colleagues, Ruud Biester, Mark himself and Sarah Robinson, when they did an ethnographic research in 1 primary and 2 secondary schools, focused on 2 experienced classroom teachers in each school, so 6 teachers in total. What they found was that the teachers appeared not to have a professional discourse beyond the language of policy. That is worrying, that if what you're talking about as part of your professional discourse is simply parroting what the latest policy happens to be. And they suggest that teacher agency, that this limits teacher agency and our potential to envisage different futures. And I see that within teacher preparation as well. There's a tension between my colleagues who want to teach in a way that shows student teachers how to teach, and those who want to teach student teachers in a way to consider what they're teaching, why they're teaching, and so forth. And I think it's important in ITE that we actually do allow our student teachers to think critically and to make mistakes and to unpack and to think about issues, because in the lifespan of the teacher, assuming you work that entire period in the teaching profession, you're going to encounter many policies. And some of these policies are short-lived. I mean, those of us who've been here long enough knew about all the different policies. Remember those? Anybody here remember the you're too young TBEI days and all that? We've got lots and lots of policies. So it's silly to actually train, because we don't train either, people to work to a policy. And the same goes for teachers. And unquestioning acceptance of policy, curriculum frameworks, is to have uncritical agency. Fourth, of course, is collective agency, which is what we're all about today. That's been mentioned a lot. There is always something we can do to change, whether it's in our everyday classroom practice or in our school. But I tell you, and as somebody said already at the beginning, it is much more effective when 2 or 3, 4 are collaborating. This way it stops individuals becoming isolated and being picked on, and they begin to have an influence on the rest of the school or the cluster or whatever. So a small group of committed teachers can engage in peer observation, joint planning, and find occasions of showing the results to other pupils and staff. And this is where being in a trade union, getting to know union members and activists in your cluster is a useful resource. So thank you very much, because that point was already made earlier. Together you can share collective agency and support each other to meet the complexities and challenges of teaching, particularly in areas of deprivation, because you need to do that to retain that sense of fulfillment in learning and teaching, that joy. The old adage, united we stand, divided we fall, is very true. And teacher agency is much more fun to engage with as a collective exercise. In conclusion, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, so I want you to go back and think about Dumbledore, about choices. It is about making choices, making a choice to be here, making a choice to be part of the union, making a choice to work collectively for change. So Priestley also talks about an ecological view of agency. It's not an individualistic exercise. We cannot do it alone. Through interaction, we can boost our agency levels. We don't need to go with the flow. We can make structural and cultural changes. And we each have the capacity to do that. But we need to think very clearly, what is it you want to achieve? You don't have to be superheroines. Please don't think that you need to be. We don't all have to be turbocharged, high-capacity individuals, because let's face it, we have a range of commitments. Daily life comes in. Life happens. And it may be that at different points of our career, our ability to contribute to agents, to be more agentic, to change, is different. I know that as my care commitments have come down, I have more energy to be active and to enact my full agency. As I've got older, I've also become more confident, more vocal, and having a less can't be bothered, I can't be bothered what you think attitude now. I will say what I need to say. But that comes with experience, that comes with life's journey, and we aren't all going to be there at the same point. We can influence small changes in practice. We can engage in thoughtful reflection about our values, our positionality, the language we use. I say a very simple thing to our students, things like, don't use them and us, don't use them and they, use we, us, because that is important too, because that is all about being inclusive. Think about your power as a teacher because you have it. Whether you might sometimes feel you don't, yes you do. Your pupils certainly feel you do. And as the adult, as the colleague, we can ask the question why. We can stop a process in its tracks. And since I came to live in Scotland, I've learned to use this phrase, oh, I can't ask a daft and nasty question. Why? Yeah, you can play with the culture and use it to your advantage in that way too. We can use to change our teaching methods, or in the sense of my colleagues said, how we sit when we're talking with students, not as a them us, but in the collective, and in a group, in a circle. We can question pre-held beliefs of a range of things. And these small steps serve as powerful reminders that all of us can make a difference and contribute to the transformation. So Alice Walker's thing about don't give up your power. But the other thing is, if you're feeling tired and you're not feeling sometimes as raring to go, it's okay. Start small, but go deep. Okay? Don't spread yourself thinly. Start small, go deep. A small group of concerned teachers can have a major impact on the school. Good practice in the school can gain recognition, and teachers can build networks on a wider scale. Those of us in the audience, those people who have got senior management roles, and you have the ability to influence at structural and cultural level, you need to audit the conditions in your school that can better boost teacher agency. Or put in another way, are there barriers that are denying teachers the opportunity to achieve agency in their work? So my final point to each of you is, oh, it's not moving forward, it's stuck. My PowerPoint is stuck. Anyway, the final sentence, hey, we got it, is this: believe in yourself. Because I think it is us sometimes that actually prevent ourselves from being as agentic as we can be. So believe in yourself. Thank you.